So in this video we'll be doing the finishing touches to what's been an almost 12-month journey with this Epiphone Sheraton. I haven't been working on the guitar for 12 months because the guitar is so important to Tony, the owner. You know, I didn't want to sort of like rush into it and then make some sort of like rash decisions that I would later come to regret, or compromise the overall integrity of the repair. But I'm super happy with how it's gone. In this video, we're going to be cutting a new bone nut. We're going to be putting all of the hardware on, stringing her up, setting her up, and getting some sound out of her. I've never actually heard this guitar or played it actually, so it'd be really great to finally get to see how the guitar feels and sounds. Okay, so we are in a great place now. I'm really happy with how this binding has turned out. I've still got to do some sanding of the clear. I'll admit I've got a couple of drips here, just on the bits that I couldn't see. I was going a bit too heavy. So we're just waiting for that to fully cure. And I figured while we're waiting for the paint to cure, we might as well level the frets and get that all done. And then we'll be very close to finished. Just going to draw a nice little line across each of these frets here, and the idea is that we just use a sanding block until all these lines are removed, and then we know that the frets are level. So we've got some just 240 grit on this 12-inch radius beam here. The deal with these jigs here is that they hold the guitar at string tension while the frets are being leveled. So sometimes you can use the truss rod to get the neck straight, but it doesn't do exactly the same thing as how the guitar responds when the neck is actually at tension. So the idea with this is to simulate string tension, which is exactly what the Plek machine does incidentally, as close as possible. So you basically apply pressure to the back of the headstock, and you set these dial gauges here to 0, or you adjust until the dial gauges are 0, which in our case is actually not only string tension, but string tension while you're in playing position. It's actually really interesting. The neck will move about 10 thousandths just from the weight of the actual neck itself when you lay it on its back. So essentially, if you had the neck set so that it was at perfect relief, which is normally about 10 thousandths of an inch in the middle here around the sort of 7th, 8th fret, when you're playing, when you lay it on its back, the neck will actually go flat there. So that's kind of what we're aiming for anyway. Now we'll just do a visual check on the straightness. That is looking lovely. It's good there. Good there. And for a final time we put the lines on so that we can re-crown these frets and get them the shape that we want them. Okay, so I've sanded this back to 2000 grit. In full disclosure, and very, very frustratingly, I have gone through, you know, the tint in a couple of areas, so I'll have to work out the best way to sort of fix that up. But I think I'm just going to sort of like finish the job, polish it up, and then, you know, see what we can do from there. One of these days I will learn to put enough paint on guitars, but until that day I continue to have to fix them up. So such is life. While we're here, we'll just give the rest of the body a bit of a polish. The owner of the guitar has asked me to fit a bone nut. The original nut was actually not too bad, but it is definitely plastic. So what I've done is I've just sort of rough shaped a piece of bone. They just start off like this, and essentially I just sort of traced around the original nut and just used a junior hacksaw to cut the rough shape out. And of course along the way we'll do a lot of refining. The next step in the process is just to mark where the nut slots should be to start with, and we'll go from there. Now I normally like to use a IKEA pencil, but I can't find one at the moment, so I've just got this coloured pencil here, and all you do is I've literally sort of halved it down the middle so that the lead is kind of sticking out, and all you do is rest it on the frets and you just mark over like that against the nut. And what that gives you is a little line on there just to indicate sort of like where essentially the level of the frets is. And the general rule of thumb is that, you know, that's what you cut down to, but the truth is that's just your starting point. You know, if you actually just cut down to there, your action at the nut would be super, super high, which we don't want. The next step is to measure 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters from the edge of the fretboard, something like that. So once you've done that, you get this incredibly useful StewMac ruler, and make sure treble side is that side and bass side is this side, and you basically just work out what set of marks sits about that width. So that is pretty close, but I reckon we could go one tighter. Okay, so I reckon it's about there. What you do is you put your ruler over there so that your outside two marks are visible in their respective slots, which is here and this one here, and then you literally just mark the others. And there are the marks for your nut slots. So the next thing is you've got to file these out. Now, this is just my approach. So I like to get a jeweler's saw, and you use these, they're like super useful for like cutting out inlays and so forth. But what I like to do is just start the cuts off with this saw. And the genesis of this actually came from working with one of my first customers, who is actually now a good friend of mine. And one of the things I love about him is that he really makes me work for my money. He's like super, super fussy, and that's kind of what you want. You know, if you're developing products or services, you really want to know what the extremes of expectation, and his is, probably up there with mine in all honesty. The reason I actually got into luthier, apart from loving it and loving guitars and stuff, was I was never satisfied with the work done by other places. But he had an HD28 that he wanted a new nut on because he didn't sort of like the feel of the guitar. And my attempts at a nut were sort of frequently rejected by him because he felt that the spacing was off. And I think what was happening is ever so slightly, and I mean ever so slightly, even this 10,000ths file, which you'll see that I have the Sumac backer on to stop it from sort of like bending around so you can get some really precise control. But even then, it will wander in the first few passes with, on a bone nut. Whereas this jeweler's saw is so fine that actually you can sort of like hold it in place with your finger and it just cuts really, really quickly and deeply. So by doing this process where I actually sort of cut the slot initially with the jeweler's file and then with this 10,000ths nut file, it ensures that my nut slots are in exactly the right place. And what I personally do is aim them towards the inside of the machine head post. Because really what you want is all of the contact to be on the front edge here. And if you have a straight slot and then the string kinks off to the left, you have to have contact at the front. That's the sort of starting point of the vibrating length of the string. But then the nut also has this job of guiding the string over to the machine head, and therefore it has to have contact with the string elsewhere in the slot. And what you get as a result is a nut slot that binds and tuning issues. So what we do here is just make these ever so slightly kick towards their respective post, and that way the string won't actually touch. Basically it will just sort of pivot at the front and then travel freely through an increasingly open slot for reasons you'll see shortly, and goes over to the string post. So that nut is now glued in and roughed out, but what you can see is that the nut slots are crazy deep, and the rule of thumb is that you want about 3/4 of the string in the slot. Now, I like to go a bit deeper. I find that first of all, it looks a bit odd for the string to be sticking out, and inevitably people will start asking questions about you screwing up, the nut slot. But I think the key thing is the string should only be touched at the bottom of the nut slot. So really what you want is for them to be V-shaped, and this is actually a pretty good example of that. If you were to cut down, and you can feel it actually when you're doing, if you cut down straight, even with this 45,000ths nut file, it starts binding, and if the nut file is binding in the nut, the string is sure as hell gonna bind in the nut slot. So what we do is when you're actually sort of cutting the nut slot, you ever so slightly, and I'm exaggerating here, but you ever so slightly at the top tip the file to one side and to one side. So you're just making it sort of like a V, basically making it baggy at the top, but nice and tight at the bottom. So that is the key to the string, the nut not binding, or the first key. And the second key is actually that the back of the nut slot is flared so that the string doesn't bind there either. Anyway, with all that said, we've got probably 2 mil to take off the top of here, and what I like to do that with is this Crimson Guitars nut and fret end file, I think they call it. I can work quickly with it, but it also leaves a really nice finish. So we're pretty close to where we want to be as our starting point now. So I'm going to start rounding over these corners here. And this again is where this file is absolutely lovely. And because it's got this safe edge, what's nice is that if you use it the right way around, you minimize the risk of sort of digging into wrong places on the guitar. We want to just take off all of these sharp corners here. Now I'm going to do the front edge, which might seem really controversial because obviously the front edge is where the string sets off, but it doesn't set off on this top edge, it sets off at the bottom. So there's absolutely no need for the sort of top edge of the front of the nut to be razor sharp. And then finally, I'm just going to take this back. Like if you look at the original nut, it's reasonably rounded at the back, and we'll do the same here. This is looking a little bit big at the moment. But for now, what we're not going to do is final sanding and polishing, because we want to get the strings perfectly set in there first, do our full setup, and then when we're happy with where the strings are sitting in the nut, that's when we'll do the final sort of shaping and sanding. Because we may actually need to sort of like take a bit of height off the top of the nut still, you know, if the nut slots end up being sort of quite a bit deeper. Again, just get this back edge. It just feels and looks beautiful. Yeah, that is nice. It's a little hint with any bolt or screw. If you go backwards, you will eventually hear, particularly with sort of hardwoods like this maple, you'll eventually hear the screw going bang, like that, and you'll feel it drop down. That is when you've got to the sort of end of the thread, and so that tells you that you've actually lined up the thread with the thread in the wood, if it's been in there previously. And that's absolutely the thing to do to avoid cross-threading or stripping the threads out. Just back up, wait for that little click, and then you're good to go. Now I did have to lose the Made in Korea sticker here. I tried to save it, but there were some scratches around it that I wanted to sort of get rid of. And the sticker wasn't in very good condition anyway, so I figured, you know, it's not like it's the serial number sticker or anything like that. Right, so that's the machine heads on. Interestingly, this strap button is way off center. But, you know, it's the original hole, so we'll go with it. There's just some polishing compound around these studs, so we'll get that out. It's kind of all gone anyway, but I don't really want to polish these pickup covers because it will remove what's left of the gold plating. But we will just give them a quick wipe over with some denatured alcohol, just to clean off the gunk. So if you remember in the early videos with this pickup, the pickup cover was sort of like way off the thing. All we did was we just put some sort of solder in to hold the cover to the base plate, and that's really important actually because the base plate, you know, is grounded. So without that connection, there's nothing really sort of solid grounding the cover. On this one here, it's just glued. No, I'm gonna solder that. Probably just do it in one place on each side. Just get some flux in there. Just helps the solder flow because it removes the contaminants. The screw holders threaded, not by my own doing, I hasten to add. So we're just going to put a little cocktail stick in there. We'll put some activator on there. Nip it short. Pair it with a very sharp file. See how I'm slicing rather than chopping? It's good. And what we'll do is we'll get the other screws in first to position this properly, and then we'll screw that in. There we go. Here's about 1.75 mil and about 1.75 mil. I'm just going to drop it ever so slightly down on the treble side and raise it ever so slightly on the bass side. Go forward. Okay, I think that's good. I like to see the nut slot going slightly lower than the back of the string. Just slightly. Because it's really the best way to ensure that the string is not sort of... That's really good. The string is not binding at the back of the nut slot. I actually just replaced the nut on a classical guitar that was brought to me, and the customer was complaining that the strings kept snapping when he was tuning up, and I actually witnessed it myself. And what was happening was the 5th and 4th string were catching so hard at the back of the nut, like it was pressing down there and it was pinching, and what it was actually doing is stripping the string to the point that it lost its integrity and snapped. So when cutting a nut, what's really important is that you sort of rough it in and get it pretty close, but give yourself a bit of wiggle room. So, you know, don't sort of cut the nut slots right down to the fret, because what you want to do is you actually want to basically get the rest of the guitar set up. So the relief on the neck, you know, dialed in, intonation, all of that good stuff, and even this sort of action at the 12th fret. So you get all of that dialed in, and once and only once that's all sorted, then you're in a good position to finalize the nut. And that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to cut the nut slots, or do the final sort of adjustment of the nut slots, and then we'll give this nut a sort of a sand and polish. What we do is we press on the 3rd fret, and you just sight, and you want just the smallest gap between the 1st fret and the string, and that is actually pretty close, but this is also a really good opportunity to sort of do your inspection of the actual nut slot itself and see where that's at. Now what I would like to do on this one is just flare this slightly out at the back, just minimize that binding. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And let's just give it one last little squiz. We're going really slowly here. Like you just want to avoid sort of putting yourself in a situation where you're having to, you know, put some super glue and bone dust in the nut slot because you've gone too deep. Again, just flaring this back out ever so slightly. And yeah, leave that there. That's good. Again, on this one, actually the height is good. I'm just going to flare the back ever so slightly on this side. That's good. So a little trick for getting tape underneath here, if you just attach it to a fret file, it makes your life a lot easier. And we'll do one more thing here. And all we're doing is putting tape there so that we can loosen the strings and rest them on the side of the headstock without scratching the paintwork.